Have you ever felt lucky for avoiding a small accident? In routine situations like catching a plate in midair before it falls and breaks, we feel like true heroes, defying a cruel destiny. Now, imagine those condemned to the death penalty who managed to survive. In rare cases recorded in history, this really happened. That is exactly what we will see here today. Known as half-hanged, an English expression that literally means half-hanged, John Smith became an urban legend in London, in Old England, not only for his skills as a thief, but also for his inexplicable ability to escape multiple times from death itself. Born into a rural family around 1661, Smith walked a tumultuous path that led him quickly from his work in the Navy to prison. His first encounter with the rope happened in 1705, when he was convicted of theft. However, at the last instant he was saved by a reprieve, a technical term for pardon, granted by the crowd that clamored for his mercy. Reports say that John began to sing moments before the end, a sad and agonizing melody that won sympathy from his audience. Freed after the reprieve, he returned to the life of a thief, only to be captured and tried again. On 2 following occasions, he escaped certain death for a legal complication and then when the prosecutor of his case died unexpectedly. However, fate finally caught up with him in 1727, at 66 years of age, when he was caught trying to steal a padlock. Even with his advanced age and his pleas for clemency, Smith was sentenced to exile in Virginia, and to this day it is not known how long he still lived, far from the London fans. Romell Broom shocked the world with his life story and heinous crimes. Born in Muskegon, Michigan, Broom had a troubled childhood marked by a series of juvenile offenses that culminated in his entry into the prison system. However, it was in 1984 that he committed the crime that would take him to death row. By taking the life of Trina Middleton in East Cleveland, Ohio, Broom was sentenced to capital punishment. But fate seemed to conspire in his favor when, in September of 2009, his execution was halted after a grotesque failure. The nurses could not find a vein for the lethal injection, granting him a reprieve. This, however, would not be the only time Broom would defy death. Due to bureaucracy that took years, he went through several other attempts at execution, arguing against the cruelty and illegality of the process. His struggle gained international prominence, with organizations such as Amnesty International launching campaigns in his defense. However, fate had its own plans. In December of 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Broom died of suspected complications of the disease, thus making Broom one of the only men who technically managed to escape the death penalty forever. Willie Francis became a famous figure in the history of United States justice for his incredible journey of surviving the maximum penalty. Convicted of the maximum penalty for the crime of taking the life of Andrew Thomas, a pharmacist from St. Martinville, Louisiana, Francis faced the electric chair quite young, but managed to escape when the equipment failed. The drama began in 1944, when Thomas was found dead in his establishment. 9 months later, Francis was detained in Texas on suspicion of trafficking, but soon became the main suspect in Thomas's case. Despite 2 written confessions, many questioned the validity of those confessions, speculating that Francis may have been coerced into admitting a crime he did not commit. In May of 1946, Francis faced the electric chair for the first time, only for there to be a failure because the equipment had been badly configured. While electricity pulsed through his body, he cried out desperately for mercy. His cries would echo through history and would be heard to this day. After the failure of the first execution, Francis obtained a defense attorney named Bertrand de Blanc, who fought against capital punishment as a form of cruel and unjust punishment. However, de Blanc's efforts were in vain when the Supreme Court rejected Francis's appeal. In a twist, Francis, determined to face his destiny with dignity, refused a second trial and lost his life in May of 1947. Kirk Noble Bloodsworth, a former fisherman from Maryland, became the first United States citizen to be sentenced to the death penalty and later exonerated by DNA testing. His story begins in 1985 when he was unjustly convicted of violating and taking the life of Don Hamilton in Rosedale, in Maryland. Despite 5 witnesses claiming to have seen him with the victim at the time of the crime, Bloodsworth always claimed to be innocent. His life changed when, in prison, he read about a case in England where DNA tests led to the exoneration of a suspect. Determined to prove his innocence, he fought for the biological evidence against him to be tested. Fate intervened when, in 1993, DNA tests proved that the bodily fluids found on the victim's clothing did not match Bloodsworth's genetic profile. After more than 9 years in prison, he was finally released. A curious fact is the meaning of Bloodsworth, which can be translated as the value of the blood. Really haunting to think that Kirk Bloodsworth's story had already been determined by his surname.
They put me in a cell. I kind of shut down. I didn't know what to do, but I felt my emotions coming, and I pushed my face in my blanket and just cried myself to sleep.
Years after his release, in 2003, the DNA of the true culprit, Kimberly Shea Ruffner, was found and matched in the genetic database. Ruffner was serving time in the same prison as Bloodsworth and was convicted for the crime against Dawn Hamilton. Bilal, a young Iranian, faced his own end in a situation that seemed inevitable. Convicted of taking the life of Abdullah Hosseinzadeh, Bilal was taken to the platform, where the rope already waited for him. But something surprising happened next, and you will not believe it. At that fateful moment, when destiny seemed sealed, the victim's mother, in an unexpected gesture of mercy, approached and delivered a slap to Bilal's face. In an extraordinary act of forgiveness, she decided to spare the life of the man who had taken her son's life. The victim's father removed the rope, and Bilal was spared the imminent execution. The photographs captured by Arash Kamushi from the news agency ISNAA immortalized that unique moment. The story behind that act of clemency is equally moving. The young Abdullah Hosseinzadeh lost his life in a street fight, a victim of a fatal blow delivered by Bilal. However, the victim's father, Abdulghani Hosseinzadeh, considered that Bilal had not acted with premeditated intent, describing him as inexperienced and naive. Wenceslao Moguel Herrera, known as El Fusilado, defied the death penalty during the turbulence of the Mexican Revolution. Under the orders of Pancho Villa, he was captured in 1915 and sentenced to the maximum penalty without trial. However, his story took an unbelievable turn when he faced a firing squad and came out alive, despite having been hit 8 to 9 times and even receiving a coup de grace. The versions about his survival vary. Some say he was found unconscious among what was left of his companions, while others claim that he crawled away from the fallen colleagues on his own, seeking refuge in the local church. Whatever the truth, the fact is that he survived, shocking everyone. His story echoed through time, appearing on radio programs and even being immortalized in a song by the British anarchist rock group Chumbawamba. Even after surviving, Moguel's life was not easy. He carried the physical and emotional scars of the event for the rest of his days. His story continues to inspire. Wenceslao was not only a survivor, but an icon of human bravery and the will to live above the impossible. John Henry George Lee, also known as John Babacombe Lee, or just Babacombe, was a man who faced the death penalty and survived not just once or twice, but 3 consecutive times and came out alive. English, born in Devon, he was convicted for the passing of his employer, Emma Keyes. Babacombe faced the sentence of the maximum penalty in 1885. The evidence against him was weak, based mainly on suspicious circumstances, like having been the only man in the house at the time of the crime, his criminal history, and an unexplained wound on his arm. He claimed innocence, but was ignored and sentenced to the death penalty by the rope around the neck. On February 23, 1885, at Exeter Prison, however, what happened was practically unbelievable. 3 attempts to apply the penalty to Babacombe were made. In all of them, the trap under the feet of the platform failed to open, despite having been carefully tested by the hangman, James Barry. The failure shocked everyone and made Babacombe an icon, who became known as the man they could not take the life of unjustly. The Home Office ordered an investigation into the incident and found that a small misalignment in the trap caused the malfunction. With that, Babacombe's sentence was changed to life imprisonment. After years of petitions, he was finally released in 1907. Identified to the press only as Alireza M. This man has tremendous luck. First, he survived the death penalty by the rope around the neck, and then he overcame something even more extraordinary, which you will not believe. Convicted by an Iranian court for possession of illicit substances, Alireza, 37 years old, was sentenced to the maximum penalty in Bojnard prison in the northeast of Iran. On the fateful morning of the 9th of October, he was taken from the cell to the gallows, where the judge read his sentence and the official documents were signed. A rope was placed around his neck and he hung for 12 minutes. Alireza was declared dead and his remains were sent to the morgue. But the unbelievable happened. The next day, a morgue employee noticed signs of life in Alireza. He was taken to the hospital and reported feeling better. His family, who were already preparing for the funeral, received the news with amazement and hope. Alireza's story captured the world's attention, with legal experts, human rights organizations, and even Iranian religious leaders weighing in on his destiny. While some defended his execution, others asked for clemency. mercy, arguing that a second attempt would be inhumane and contrary to Islamic principles. The international repercussion pressed hard until Iran's Minister of Justice decided to spare Ali Reza's life. This man managed not only to escape his certain end, but won an unlikely battle against one of the most severe governments on the planet. Don't forget to subscribe so you can watch more videos like this.